Elden Ring. Oh, Elden Ring. Shaper of life, arbiter of fate, Lord of the very stars above.
In the setting of Elden Ring, there are space-dwelling creatures of incredible power, several of which are insectoid in nature. The Astels, for example, resemble antlions, whereas the unnamed outer god of rot, sealed beneath the earth, would appear to resemble a scorpion. We do not know the exact distinction between outer gods and Astels, yet both are known as falling stars that fell to the lands between. And it was with one such falling star that our story begins. The Greater Will, most likely some sort of outer god, sent a golden star to the world, and this beast became the titular Elden Ring. It is possible that the impact of this great star formed a large crater, of which the lands between are centered around. It seems clear that the Elden Ring arrived with the Elden Beast. The two are suggested to be as one. However, the Great Tree is another matter entirely. Whilst not absolutely clear, it would appear that the Great Tree existed prior to the Elden Beast's arrival, and it was only later that it became known as the Erdtree, the Golden Tree. Before the age of the Erdtree, a dragon lord, Lokidasax, ruled the lands between. To put it simply, there exists an immense tree long ago known as the Primordial Crucible, where all life was once blended together. In this example, I believe the word crucible is used in the sense of vessel or container. Now, this primordial tree was most likely not golden and was by its very nature chaotic. Humans formed with tails, growths, bony knots and such. The misbegotten enemies found throughout the game are good examples of these, as are, no doubt, the Omen. In the past, these features were seen as boons, but during the age of the Erdtree became reviled as a curse. For the Elden Beast is the vassal of the Greater Will, the embodiment of order, and the Elden Ring brought order to the chaos of primordial life.
All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the Greater Will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
This could be referring to the primordial crucible, or it could be referring to a more universal state of affairs, or indeed both. Yet, it seems in either case, the Greater Will's order involves birth, life itself flourishing in a somewhat controlled manner. Just what the Greater Will gets from all of this is unknown. The Golden Tree is thought to have dominion over life and rebirth, so it is possible the Greater Will feeds off this energy in some way, but we can only speculate. So, the Elden Beast arrived at the lands between, as did another, Marika, from the lands of the Numen. Various sources tell us that the lands of the Numen are beyond the lands between, and one in particular remarks that the Numens are supposed descendants of denizens of another world. We also know they are long-lived, but seldom born. In some ways you might liken them to elves in that sense. Curiously enough, most of those we can say for a certainty are Numen are all women. Marika, though, became host of the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring itself. As to what her goals were, it is my belief that her people, the Numen, were slowly dying. Births were rare enough to the point that she believed eventually they would die out. And furthermore, it was her belief that using the Elden Ring, she could rectify this. This is, of course, my conjecture, based on information such as long-lived, seldom born, and dialogue such as let a new age begin, an age glistening with life, brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erdtree. And however ruined this world has become, however mired in torment and despair, life endures, births continue. There is beauty in that, is there not? Irrespective of her reasoning, however, Marika waged war against all comers, the fire giants whose great flame could burn the golden tree, the gloam-eyed queen, wielder of the god-slaying black flame, and eventually even the dragons themselves. All were vanquished in the end, and the Golden Order's rule became the new status quo. At Journey's end, advent of the Erdtree's age, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord and husband of Queen Marika, along with his warriors, were divested of their grace, the golden hue in their eyes that granted them a form of immortality. She then exiled these tarnished warriors from the lands between, where they would wage war in lands afar, eventually meeting their death. Sometime after they died, however, Marika restored their grace, bidding them return to the lands between and claim the Elden Ring once more. Meanwhile, the lands between underwent the Shattering. After defeating the Empyrean gloam-eyed queen, Marika locked away the queen's black flame, destined death. You see, whilst the concepts of life, fate, and death are very far removed from what we understand of them in reality, you might say there are, in essence, two forms of immortality in Elden Ring, if we simplify things greatly. First up, there is the guidance of grace granted by Marika to those who are otherwise mortals. Then we have the gods and demigods who have their own form of immortality, and this is where destined death comes into play. The god-slaying black flame, understandably, presents a threat, as did the giant's flame which could burn the golden tree. Thus, Marika used her beast, Malekith, to defeat the gloam-eyed queen and seal away the god-killing black flame. Marika and her demigod offspring were, in theory, safe. With the first Elden Lord Godfrey, Marika had 3 sons, Godwyn, Morgott, and Mohg. Whilst Godwyn was a golden child, seemingly beloved by everyone, even befriending the dragon Fortisax after defeating him during the War of the Dragons. Morgott and Mohg were omens, born cursed, and at some point banished to live beneath the royal capital in the sewers. After Godfrey was exiled, Marika's second Elden Lord was Radagon, with whom she had 2 more children, Melania and Miquella, both Empyrean, both afflicted from birth. Melania harboured rot, whereas Miquella was cursed with eternal childhood. You might be wondering, just what is an Empyrean? The gloam-eyed queen, Melania, Miquella, and Rani all held the title at one point or another. So far as we know, Empyreans are individuals chosen by the Two Fingers, conduits of the greater will, who may one day ascend to godhood, a new god to forge a new order. Indeed, prior to becoming Elden Lord, this Radagon was married to a moon sorceress by the name of Renala, with whom he had 3 children, Rani, Radahn, and Rykard, each of them a demigod. For Radagon was, in fact, Marika. The Eternal Queen had the power to transfigure herself. Indeed, there was even a treasure of the capital city, a golden veil that allowed the user to mimic nearby objects, known as Marika's Mischief. There is some debate as to whether Radagon was always Marika, or if, at some point, he was merely a champion, his own entity. At some point, joined with Marika wholly. It is my belief that Radagon was always an aspect, a fragment of Marika, or born at some point. I do not believe Radagon was ever a separate individual. Radagon and Marika each representing a different part of the God Queen. Still, Radagon and Renala's child, Enchantress Rani, was involved in what became known as the Night of the Black Knives. She stole a fragment of destined death from Malekith and imbued it into the knives of Numen assassins, who used it to kill Godwyn, the first recorded death of a demigod. Following this, Queen Marika was driven to the brink, and it seems likely that Godwyn's death was either catalyst or excuse for her shattering of the Elden Ring, which then led to the Shattering, a war between demigods, which some believe led the Greater Will to abandon the lands between. Of the demigods, some got their hands on shards of the Elden Ring, great runes. Praetor Rykard and his Volcano Manor blasphemed against the Golden Order, and he was besieged on his mountain for it. Godric, a weak descendant of Godwyn the Golden, was hounded from the capital and eventually took up in Stormvale Castle, where he began grafting the bodies of others unto himself, seeking greater strength. Morgott escaped the sewers and took regency of the royal capital, hiding his omen form and defending the city against all who would seek the thrones, all who would seek the Erdtree. Mohg and Rani both vanished, pursuing secret, mysterious goals, whereas Malenia and Radahn, the mightiest demigods to remain, became locked in combat in the Caelid wilds. To meet Radahn's measure, Malenia had to abandon her pride and unleash the scarlet rot she harboured since birth, blooming on the battlefield and blighting all Caelid with her affliction, inflicting it upon Radahn in the process and losing consciousness. Then her body was spirited away from the battlefield by Finley, one of her Cleanrot knights, whilst Radahn was kept at bay. Miquella, believed by his sister Malenia to be the most fearsome of all Empyrean, having the stuff of a true god, had slumbered within his Halig tree, his holy tree, the dreaming demigod's attempt at creating another great tree. However, in secret, Morgott's twin brother Mohg cut him from the tree and carried him far, far away, attempting to court the young demigod, his half-brother. Yet, his efforts appear to have been in vain. It is possible that Miquella's flesh is just that, flesh, an empty husk, with the Empyrean's soul residing elsewhere, perhaps within a dream. A fine mystery to explore in future content. Such is how it stands when the Tarnished returned to the lands between. Grace returned, they arose from death and returned to their home. Warriors all. Our Tarnished represents either a direct follower of first Elden Lord Godfrey, or a descendant of one of those warriors. But Elden Ring tells us that all Tarnished were warriors once. Arriving to find their maiden dead or otherwise absent, the Tarnished is instead guided by a mysterious figure who introduces herself as Melina and sets about on their quest to become Elden Lord. 2 great runes are needed for this, and after claiming them from the Shard Bearers, the Tarnished makes their way to the royal capital, Leyndell, to have an audience with Queen Marika herself. Instead, they are met by Morgott, the Omen King. Vanquishing him reveals that the Erdtree is sealed against the outside world. None may pass, demigod, lord or otherwise. Then, Melina reveals the only way to penetrate the thorns guarding the way is to burn the Golden Tree. You see, reaching the Golden Tree revealed to Melina her purpose, why she exists, burned and bodiless. It is very strongly inferred that Melina is Marika's daughter. A lesser implication is that Melina is either the Glomide Queen or some aspect, some reincarnation of her. There are several connections between them, after all. Melina's actions directly lead to destined death, which once belonged to the Glowmite Queen, being unleashed once more, whether or not she lives to see it. And if the Tarnished should become the Lord of Frenzied Flame whilst Melina is alive, she proclaims that she will seek them to slay them using destined death. On top of that, this announcement is made whilst the focus is on the reveal of Melina's left eye, otherwise shut and sealed throughout her every appearance. And that eye is purple. Gloam, of course, means twilight, and the twilight sky is often a rather striking purple. But does this mean the Glowmite Queen was always a daughter of Marika, one that was burnt and left bodiless, rather like Lunar Princess Rani was left burnt and bodiless? Perhaps. Or perhaps Melina is merely some aspect of the old Glowmite Queen, sealed and reborn. At any rate, the Tarnished ascends through the clouds to the mountaintop of the giants and uses the flame of the giants to ignite the Erdtree. This act transports the Tarnished to crumbling Farum Azula, an ancient settlement floating high in the sky and gradually falling to ruin over eternity. One explanation for this transportation would be that Marika, Radagon, or someone else had a failsafe in place to ensure any who would commit the cardinal sin of burning the Erdtree are sent to Farum Azula. After all, the Tarnished encounters old followers of the Glowmite Queen in the crumbling city, the Godskin Apostles. They also meet Marika's beast, Malekith. Was he confined here for his sin of allowing destined death to be stolen? Defeating the beast unseals destined death in its entirety, which appears to burn away the thorns that blocked the Tarnished's path.
Black flames have devoured the Erdtree, and the lands between are shrouded by death's dark fate.
The conflagration of the Golden Tree blankets the royal capital in ash, leaving only the tallest spires untouched. And it is upon one of these, cradling the remains of his son, Morgoth, that the Tarnished come upon Godfrey, first Elden Lord. In the midst of combat, Godfrey renounces his beast regent, Sarosh, and fights the Tarnished on a level ground as a warrior, revealing his name as Horalu, Badlands chieftain, for he was a warrior raised to the mantle of Lord and given Sarosh to curb and control his battle frenzy. All the same, Horalu falls to the Tarnished, who then finally comes face to face with Queen Marika. Seemingly crucified for her sin of shattering the Elden Ring, Marika's body is turned over to that of Radagon's, the Golden Order's final champion. Whether this is one last test or simply the penultimate defense of the Elden Ring is hard to say, but once Radagon is defeated, the Elden Ring manifests itself as its original form, the Elden Beast, wielding a sword that seems to be forged from Marika's body. Falling to the Tarnished, the Elden Beast, vassal of the Greater Will, and perhaps the last real connection the Will had to the lands between, vanishes. And the Tarnished is given the choice of how to proceed. They can either mend the Elden Ring within Marika's body using the Great Runes, or depart with Rani, should the Tarnished have embarked on her quest. Adjustments can be made to the Elden Ring, depending on the path the Tarnished trod. Yet if the Tarnished became Lord of Frenzied Flame, any choice is removed, and they are forced to unleash the Chaos Flame, burning down the Erdtree. But all of this leaves us with many lingering questions, perhaps foremost amongst them, just what is it that the Elden Ring does? A simple question with no clear answer. We are told it is that which commands the stars, but even that isn't too specific, considering stars have some control over fate, or at least for certain individuals. Does it mean it quite literally? The Elden Ring is able to command the beings born on stars, such as the Elden Beast, the Astel, and so forth? Or do we look at it more figuratively? Is the Elden Ring able to control or warp reality itself to some extent? Perhaps all we can safely say is that the Elden Ring can grant various blessings and powers, enhancing that which already exists. For example, the Elden Ring is made up of great runes, and each great rune grants a boon to the Tarnished, and those blessings can be activated by rune arcs. So perhaps the Elden Ring, in its most basic sense, brings out your most latent of strengths, empowering them to their full potential, or as you might say,
giving life its fullest brilliance.
But truthfully, we can only speculate on the exact specifics of it, something I believe was left intentionally extremely vague. After all, the Elden Ring is made up of great runes. Perhaps the great runes already existed before the Elden Beast arrived. It is entirely possible the Elden Beast merely united the great runes, forming the Elden Ring, and that is why the Elden Ring can still exist even after the Elden Beast is vanquished, despite us being told that the Elden Beast became the Elden Ring. If you choose to believe that the Elden Ring is that which governs reality, writing the laws of the world, you would be well within your rights to do so. After all, the endings of the game certainly might imply that the Elden Ring has some control to exert in that sense. But you might also argue those different landscapes are the result not of the Elden Ring, but of the consequences following each mending rune. As a certain sorcerer once said,
"What are you prepared to believe?" Don't just walk off, cursed one.